Hello and welcome to the Kielder Observatory podcast. I'm Ian Brannan. In this episode, we chat to Andy Saunders, who is the man behind the Apollo Remastered book and exhibition, in which Andy has lovingly remastered and restored images from the original NASA photographic film of our first journeys to the moon. Now, the exhibition is being held at Queen's Hall Arts Centre in Hexham, and it's there until the end of May, and features stunning, never-before-seen images of the Apollo missions, including spacewalks, lunar landscapes, and portraits of astronauts. It's free to attend. You can go along anytime between now and the end of May. Well, in this episode, I was also joined by Dan Pye, Director of Astronomy, as well as Andy Saunders himself, in front of a live audience at Queen's Hall Arts Centre on the day the exhibition was launched back in March. And Andy starts by telling us about how this all came about.
Well, thanks for the welcome and thanks for coming down and supporting the exhibition. It's great to be up here in the northeast. The exhibition's been to various places around the country and internationally, and it's become all manner of other things, such as an immersive show, which is a projected experience that we worked on with Tom Hanks, Christopher Riley and 59 Productions in 2023. But to get back to something tangible, see them as what are these C-type photographic prints in an exhibition space, in a gallery space, is the nuts and bolts. So it's great to be here in Hexham.
So my initial question is, how does a guy from Wigan get access to a secure vault at NASA and get your hands on this film in the first place? It's quite an incredible journey, I think. There's
been some interesting quotes on that. The media like to take things a little bit too far. I think it was the Daily Mail said, I found a secret key to a vault and had access.
As you do.
That's not quite the case. So the film has been locked away, pretty much untouched for about half a century. And this is the original flight film. It's incredibly delicate, obviously incredibly important. So it's preserved, it's hermetically sealed, it's frozen to maintain its quality. So everything we've seen, and this is really the reason I took on the project, was for 50 years we've seen really not great quality imagery. It's stunning it's inherently stunning because it's people on the moon, it's people in space doing these extraordinary things. But the quality I've always been frustrated with, and that didn't make any sense because actually they used the best cameras, the best lenses, the best film, the best photo lab. So the reason for that is what we've typically seen is images that are based on copies of those originals. So up until the NASA and Arizona State University undertook a project that started in about 2008 and was completed around 2018 to get the holy grail out of that frozen vault. The original film, this is the film that was actually in the cameras on the moon, and digitally scan it to an incredibly high resolution. But NASA is public funded, so everything is public domain, everything's open source. I'm sure you guys know, and a lot of your listeners, images that say come down from the probes and rovers on Mars are instantly available to everyone, and people can do within reason what they like with it. So this incredible archive became available around 2018, and no one was really doing anything with it. And I just took it upon myself to go through all 35,000 when I realised just how incredible a difference can be to anything we've seen for half a century.
Yeah, it is an incredible story. And so to deal with this footage then, obviously a great deal of responsibility for you to look after this. What's been the relationship with NASA then over this? Because I guess if you're dealing with someone in an organisation like this, obviously you say it's in public domain and all that, but NASA are going to be very keen to ensure that the sort of basis, the originality of these is kept, faithful recreations and what have you to what you come up with.
Well, NASA have really just done what you'd expect NASA to do, which is very black and white, science-based. Look, here's the original film, we've scanned it, and there's the data. So they haven't done anything with it. I've just taken it upon myself to work on this footage. They're really happy with what I've done. Very supportive of what I've done. Of course, it celebrates the past and also gets people excited about the future with the Artemis missions. So they support it in that way, but it was no way sponsored by NASA or overseen by NASA. They just like, I think, the results. To have people that are I guess, passionate enough and prepared to put enough effort in to do this kind of work so that they don't need to is a bit of a boon for them, I think. So, yeah, they've been very supportive, but I didn't need any clearance, if you like, from them. We did for the book, so there are certain elements of the book that we need to get NASA's permission for, which we did, but beyond that, it was more important for me was what do the astronauts think? Yeah. Because it was very important that I wanted this to be, I've always wanted to go to the moon. I can't because I'm claustrophobic, so I can't put the suit on, and I'm too soft.
Otherwise, you'd be there.
Otherwise, I'd be right there. If I could go anywhere in the universe, I'd go to Tranquility Base. I mean, it would just be, just see what was left behind. I mean, it just, that thought is incredible, but I know I can never do it. So the next best thing for me is to work on these images, and it just becomes more, I'm closer to it, it becomes more visceral. I want people to know what it was like. 12 human beings from Earth have walked on the moon. There's billions of us. They were our representatives. So to have the fact that they took incredible photographs, that's the way that they can take us along with them. So that it helps me, and I hope it helps other people to say, well, when the astronaut said, Charlie Duke, for example, said, this is the next best thing to be in there. He gave me lots of tips about what do I need to get right in the editing to make sure it is accurate. So, for example, the sky in space isn't just black, it's a black that apparently we Earthlings can't even comprehend. I've been in a dark cupboard and I've closed my eyes, but apparently it's black. It's blacker than that. Charlie Duke said it's almost like it's got a texture, like a black velvet. But the moon itself is incredibly bright. Of course, it's unfiltered sunlight. So it's incredibly bright white light contrasted with this amazingly black that produces this huge dynamic range. So getting that right in the photographs has been really important to do, and to have those that were actually there critique it and support it has been brilliant.
Andy Saunders, the man behind Apollo Remastered. I'm Ian Brannan. Alongside us here is Director of Astronomy at Kielder Observatory. This is Dan Pye, and so he's in charge of lots of things, including telescopes. So Dan, for you as a keen astronomer, you've got lots of questions about these images.
I do have loads of questions about these images, but just kind of picking up on what you said about you want to go to the moon. Is this a childhood kind of dream that's kind of become a reality by being able to access the moon through these images?
That's really when people say, why aren't you from Houston? How can someone from Wigan be doing this? And the start of it all, I always say, is just my absolute obsessions, as long as I can remember. And I'm not entirely sure if it was a specific moment that got me obsessed in it. I'd always been into anything that could fly, so anything that, for example, you throw a boomerang or a whiz-back, I don't know if anyone remembers those. There was an aerobie and there was a whiz-back. And the fact that you could throw that and it kind of travels somewhere and comes back, or something you can get higher than that, like a remote-controlled plane, and you think, that's been through the clouds and it comes back. I was always fascinated by anything that could go somewhere that high. But rockets, I guess for a lot of little boys, were like the ultimate flying machine. I'd liken it to if you're out in the Lake District and a F-35 or a jet fighter comes when it's training and flies low, and you get that noise and the hairs stand up in the back of your arms. I'm a bit like, it's like that times 100 for me for a rocket. So I'd always been into that. In terms of the moon, I mean, you've got some proper astronomers here and you've got some proper telescopes at Kielder. I just got a toy telescope one Christmas. Tasco, was that a brand?
Maybe,
back in the day.
Maybe.
I think it's from Argos, because my dad was quite tight. And I got that for Christmas. It might have been off Father Christmas, I'm not sure. But I got that for Christmas, and I mean, the optics are so bad, you can't see anything through it other than the moon. But I was just amazed when I pointed that at the moon. What we typically see is that silver two-dimensional disc. It instantly became three-dimensional. It was that more than just getting closer to it, it was that three-dimensional. It's like, wow, this is a world. And it's a world you could maybe go and visit. And then in a rocket. And then when I learned, actually people have done that, and they've walked on it, and they've driven a car on it, that blew my mind, and I was obsessed ever since.
And I think the moon is one of those things that we've talked about quite a lot at the observatory, and every time we look at the moon, it's the same kind of questions that come about. But the moon is a very constant thing throughout the entirety of human history. So when we see the moon right now, that's how it looked 40,000 years ago to prehistoric man. So we're sharing that same view, and then going there is just that extra layer. So you've seen the moon through these photographs, much higher resolution than we can see it through a telescope, though, because actually physically getting there is really difficult. And I think that's one of the questions that always comes up. Why can't we see Tranquility Base using big telescopes? And it's because you actually just need to go there to see it at that resolution. In terms of the science from these images, then, from NASA's point of view, is there anything additional that they've learned from access to these really high resolution images that you know of?
I don't know. I mean, we've learnt a lot in terms of the history. So I've uncovered things such as Neil Armstrong's face, Buzz Aldrin's face through his visor, how far Alan Shepard really hit his second golf ball, and all kinds of things, and lots of smaller details that if you read through the book, there are a lot of smaller things that have come about from doing this work. Whether NASA, from the science point of view, have used those to learn anything, I don't know. But of course, hopefully we're going to be going back soon-ish.
And I think, hopefully so, yeah. And I'd like to think that's why this peak of interest in astronomy is starting to come back now as well, because there is a real interest in the night sky, in space travel, and it seems to be growing at quite a rapid rate. And I hope that images such as this show us that it's an incredible place to go back to, and we should go back there to find out more with new technology. And just another technical point that actually I want to check with you is, and I don't know what these, the crosshairs that you see in the images, what are these crosshairs?
So they're fiducial marks, which were on a Rousseau plate. So the purpose of those is the images that were taken on the lunar surface, they didn't have this Rousseau plate on the images that were taken from the spacecraft, only on the lunar surface. And they were used for photogrammetry. They were used so that of course it's analog film and it's very thin based. It was a special thin based film so they could fit more photographs on a magazine. Because of course one single photograph has a very high scientific return per unit of weight. So every photograph that could squeeze in every magazine was really important. So they used very thin based film. That also meant that when that was exposed to the temperatures and to a vacuum and travelling through back from the moon, if that film had become just very slightly distorted, they would know because they can cross-reference those cross marks or fiducial marks to the actual Rousseau plate. So the Rousseau plate was a glass plate on the back of the camera before the film plane, and it had these incredibly precise marks that was perfectly made for that camera.
Mm. And did radiation have an impact on the film as well?
No, they did take some very fast film. People say, why can't you see stars in the sky? That's quite a frustrating question. But actually, they did take some very fast film in order to capture stars on things like the Gegenschein and that kind of thing, and some of the dim light phenomena. And they were a bit more subject to radiation fogging. But this type of film, there was no effect.
With these images as well, there's fascinating stories, and in the exhibition you've got little plaques underneath each image explaining the story behind them. So for you, it's not just a case of redeveloping images and all that kind of thing. You've looked into the story behind the image as well, and they're quite fascinating. What are your favourite stories behind these images?
Okay, there are so many. I mean, they took 35,000 photographs. One thing that I want the exhibition to show people that don't know much about Apollo, or the book to do, is there was more than just Apollo 11. So a lot of people think we went to the moon once, and that Neil Armstrong was the only man that walked on the moon. So the book and the exhibition is divided into every mission. We actually went to the moon 9 times. We landed 6 times. So there are stories in every single mission. They took a lot of risks. I think a lot of people know about Apollo 13 and the explosion. Apollo 16, there was almost a similar event. So they took these extraordinary risks. But what I wanted to do with the book, as you say, is not just show these impressive photographs, it's to tell the story of all those missions so people can learn about there was an Apollo 8. And I mean, everyone, I think, should know there was an Apollo 8. That was the first time we actually escaped Earth completely. and voyaged to the moon, and we didn't land, but that journey to the first humans to completely escape Earth, it was an incredibly important moment. But there are all kinds of... I love reading the transcripts. I mean, if anyone is into it, the transcripts are online. So just listening to these guys talking, sometimes to each other when they were out of radio contact, or to mission control. And it's just... And some of the quotes are in the book, and I can't remember the specifics, but on Apollo 16, they had this issue with the engine, the SPS engine. So they had to station keep, which means the command module... and the lunar module had to not lose sight of each other. Now, you'd think this would be an incredibly high-tech method of doing this, but it wasn't necessarily. There were times where they had to do it by sight. And there's this conversation saying, oh, where are you? Well, I think I'm kind of up and behind and over your shoulder. So, yeah, I can see you. Oh, no, that's a planet. It's like, when has anyone ever said, I think that's you, but I've just realised it's not you, it's a planet. So there's all these little tidbits throughout the book, and I'm reading these. They were kind of declassified in the late 70s, and just listening to their enthusiasm. A lot of them are very dry. Apollo 11 was an interesting crew. I mean, if Michael Collins wasn't on that mission, it would be really dull. He kind of lightened the mood a little bit, but there are some, like Apollo 10, as they're leaving the moon, the way they describe what they're looking at. So what a lot of people don't realise is, on the way to the moon, because they landed at the Terminator, they kind of course, you've got to shoot for where the moon's going to be by the time you arrive. So the moon's over here, and you're shooting that way. So the moon's on its dark side. So on some of the missions, they didn't see the moon until they arrived. And even then, it was only when the stars disappeared and there was a huge hole where stars should be that we're like, wow, we're at the moon. So when they then left the moon, and this was on Apollo 10, suddenly they got their first view of it, and they explained how it filled. They had a round window in the hatch, and it perfectly filled. There's a photograph in the book, actually. You can see the outside rim of this hatch and the whole moon, and just the way they described that moment is really interesting. So it's not just about the photographs yet, it's about telling those stories.
And something else you sort of alluded to there, that the Apollo missions weren't just about landing on the moon. Well, they were in the end, but of course there was a big lead up to that. There was a lot of space exploration. Of course, it was the space race. They were in competition with the Russians as well, and you know they were at some points doing things first, like their spacewalk, and then you did the United States spacewalk, and so on. So really, these photographs as well, and the equipment obviously develops over that time too, I guess, as well. So you've got the development of the whole Apollo program captured in this book, but also advances in photographic technology too, through probably as a result of these space missions, I would imagine, in some small part as well.
Yeah, well, there's a whole chapter on the back about the development of space photography, about the cameras. You've given me an opportunity to plug my next book as well, actually.
I laid it on a plate for you there, you see.
You can pre-order now from all good bookstores the prequel to Apollo Remastered, which is Gemini and Mercury Remastered. So that's the missions before Apollo, so that's the very first missions into space, first US spacewalk, for example, on Gemini. And back in the Mercury days, photography was just not really an option. On Alan Shepard's he was the first American in space, although he didn't go into orbit. He didn't carry a camera inside the capsule. It was an automated camera, pointed out a little porthole that took these photographs, because the capsules were very small. They weren't in space that long. The pilots were obviously incredibly busy. They didn't really want to faff, to be quite frank, with trying to take photographs as well. But John Glenn, who was the first American in orbit, said, no, this is an incredible opportunity. I'm going into space. People are going to want to know what it's like to be an astronaut. People are going to want to see my view. I want to take a camera. So it was actually, we went for a haircut in Cocoa Beach, where they were training, walked past they call a drugstore, a pharmacy, and saw one of the first automatic cameras on the commercial market. He said, that'd be perfect, because I don't need to play with the aperture and that kind of thing. So he bought it for $40 and said, I want to take this camera into space. And so they adapted it, they made a pistol grip. He took that, and with it he took the first ever photographs of Earth from space, handheld. So those kind of stories are in a little bit in this book and also in the next book. And that was really the start of space photography. It was not until the Gemini mission, so there's a photograph in the exhibition downstairs from Gemini 4 of the first American spacewalk, and it's of Ed White. For those who've seen it, he's kind of floating on his side, and there's the Earth behind, and it's an absolutely stunning shot. And if you think back to those times, for the public to see an image like that, up until then, they were interesting photographs of Earth, but when they suddenly could see a fellow human floating in space outside his spacecraft with a backdrop of Earth, that created an enormous amount of public excitement. And that was a turning point in NASA's appreciation for space photography. There was a lot more funding after that because they realised we need to bring the public along with us, we need continued congressional support, we need that funding. And so getting people excited with the photography became a thing. So they invested a lot more time in the photography, and the cameras developed, yeah. And you needed a very different camera on the moon than you would take inside a capsule, for example.
And I think that public excitement, public interest, of course, the question always comes up, did we really go to the moon? Did it actually happen? The skeptics come out all the time. And my standard response to that now is, I don't care. Because ultimately, we've got a book here filled with stuff which inspires people. And it was this stuff which inspired people to go and become future scientists, to then break barriers. And eventually we got incredible technologies as a result of this. And I think that's stuff that people don't really recognize, is what did we get from breaking these barriers by going to the moon? Things like walkie-talkies, and eventually a little bit further down the line, pacemakers, and all of these life-saving technologies. And so public interest, absolutely.
Yeah, it's pushing the boundaries brings the best out of, develops technologies. Other than, sadly, of course, war can do it. But the best thing I think you can do in a peaceful manner is to go and explore and push the boundaries. And it's people say, why go back to the moon? It's incredibly expensive, of course. Why spend all that money in space? Of course, you don't spend the money in space. You spend the money on Earth. It employs people. But also, it's just... one of our finest inherent human qualities is we explore. You think about... I realised this hit home when I had kids, and you watch them develop as toddlers. When they can crawl, they will crawl, and they'll go in all the cupboards because they can explore. And when they're old enough to walk around the village, they'll want to go and walk around the village to see what's in the village. And when they can get a bus into the next town, they'll get on a bus and go and see that. We are capable of going back to the moon. We're capable of going to Mars and beyond. So to make an active decision to not do, I think is almost like an anti-human thing to do. So as well as you say, all those kind of offshoot developments in technology and that kind of thing, it's all good.
And we spoke to an astronaut recently. We spoke to Clayton Anderson on the podcast quite recently, and Clayton said if we could take every single world leader and just send them to space, just for a couple of hours and show them the Earth, the difference that could make is huge just by looking at this tiny little spherical thing orbiting beneath them and the grandeur of the universe. I think in a way it also creates this sense of humanity and how fragile and important we are, and how trivial almost in some cases some of our problems are. And he said it also made him feel a lot closer to religion as well. He was quite...
A lot of the astronauts had all kinds of different... I mean, Edgar Mitchell actually came up with a quote like that's in the book. There's a young person here, I'm not sure I can tell you the full quote. But he said, if you could grab a politician, drag them 250,000 miles to the moon, turn around and say, look at that, you son.
Yeah.
That's what he'd love to do, because they were... And as well, when we went to the moon, and this was something Bill Anders said, who sadly died last year on Apollo 8, is we did make all this effort to go to the moon, but what we really discovered was Earth. So by far the most popular photographs from the Apollo program are, for example, Earthrise or the Blue Marble. The first opportunity to look back at ourselves and see how we have only got one of these things. They said it's like an incredibly... It's clearly held life. It was the only bit of any colour, and if you imagine the endless blackness of space and then this blue orb, so it impacted a lot of them in quite deep ways.
Did you see that, just as a side point, did you see that photograph yesterday from Blue Ghost?
Yeah.
During the lunar eclipse, where the Earth is sat with the sun behind it, and you've got just this rim of light coming from the sun behind it. It's amazing. If you haven't seen it, you should check that out.
To see that from that perspective is incredible. In fact, again, there's another image like that in the book on Apollo 12. So the only 3 humans who have ever seen the sun pass behind Earth to create, it's almost exactly this same image as that, was on Apollo 12, and they were describing these incredible bands of colour caused by the atmosphere. You can see it a little bit in that photograph, but they had the Hasselblad cameras, and before they got to the magic moment, they ran out of colour film.
Oh no! Oh no!
No one's ever seen it since. They're not alive anymore. But what they did have is this 16mm DAC camera had colour film, so they simply filmed it almost as video footage. Yeah. But one of the things I do in the book is stack. I'm surprised we got this far in an astronomy podcast and you've not asked me about stacking.
Yeah,
but anyway,
we've stacked many times in the past.
Yeah,
so let's
imagine
do it.
you are the ultimate stackers. So I stacked that footage to create that colour image, and you can see these colour bands.
Stacking is not something that I would have normally... I wouldn't have asked you that question as well. It's interesting to hear that you use stacking in this case. This
whole process started where I've always had a frustration. So I've had this childhood obsession with Apollo. But the ultimate frustration is I wanted to see Neil Armstrong on the moon. You know, he's the first. He's this absolutely pivotal moment in human history. I want to see him on the moon, and I couldn't. And we've never been able to because he held the camera. They only took one camera. There is some of like his back or the back of his ankle or what have you. So that's when I decided to look at the other source of film, which was this 16mm DAC movie camera. So this, like, if you think of an old cine film type camera, very low quality, very noisy. And they filmed the EVA out of the lunar module window. And Armstrong went out, and then there's a moment in that where he's got to collect a contingency sample. So if anything went wrong, at least they've got a bit of the moon, and they get back in and they come home. Buzz Aldrin's in the lunar module filming this, and because he's got this sample and he's preparing it, he stands still for 15 seconds, but it's at a very low frame rate. He's also got his gold visor up because he's in the shadow of the lunar module. And I've always noticed when I was young, I could see a flicker of what looked like a face. And to see, we're so used to seeing anonymous puffy white spacesuits and a gold visor. When you see, it's, oh my God, there's a person there on the moon. But it could have been Dave from down the road. It could have been anybody because it was really poor quality. When that was then digitised in HD, you could see slightly better quality, but it was still not great. But I thought, well, because he stands still long enough, if I get several frames, I'll stack those, because I knew that, so obviously your listeners are well into this. I thought, if you can stack Mars, why can't you stack Neil Armstrong?
Yeah, why not? Yeah.
It's the same principle. Yeah. So I did that, and what came, I just couldn't believe what I was looking at.
And was that the magical moment for you?
That was, yeah. I mean, I'll never do nothing in my life will ever come back. It was almost like I was in the lunar module working on this image. And as you know, with stacking, you film Mars and it's just that orange blob as a single frame. And then I liken it to, once you've run it through and got the output, it's almost like you've got something really out of focus in a microscope, and then you turn it and that moment it becomes perfect. Yeah. It was like that, and I could see his eyelid. And because I knew what Neil Armstrong looked like, I'm like, not only have we got a clear image of Neil Armstrong on the moon, I can see his eyelid, and it's recognisably Neil Armstrong. So I released that image on the 50th anniversary of Apollo 11, and that was on the front page of the Telegraph, and it was this 15-minute whirlwind and, 15 minutes of fame type thing. But it was at that time that also they'd just completed this project of getting the original flight film out of the freezer. So I then started to work on some of those, and I was like, I'm putting my life on hold. Yeah. I'm going to go through every bit of 16mm film, every single frame, for 10 hours worth, stack what I can stack, and use this original flight film, all 35,000 images, produce them as best I can, and then here we are, see where we end up.
That must have taken some hours.
The publisher asked me to work it out. It was about 10,000. It was about 3 to 3.5 years. And then the research, about who took the photograph, what can we see in it, and then getting that into a chronological order, because they had multiple cameras, multiple magazines, so you know what order each magazine's in, but did they take a photograph on that camera, and then to line all of that up took a lot of work as well. So yeah, it was a big old project, but the book's gone on to do amazing things, and I've been really lucky with it. So, and I love the content, the subject matter.
Well, that's what I get from it, I think, is I get the passion from it that you clearly have for this project. And I think, if anything from this, is that the thing that you've taken the most? I mean, it's all well and good to be selling books, but actually the specialty of these books and the emotional response must be the most special thing, is it?
Yeah, so it's interesting to be, when I give talks, for example, I've done some on IMAX, where it's really, people really get quite emotional about it.
Yeah.
So afterwards, the grown men will come up and say, a few of those, when you explained what it was, and I had that image, I got quite teary. The show that's on, the Moonwalkers show, you combine these images on a massive scale, and you have the music and Tom Hanks telling you about them. But you look around and people just got tears rolling. People really... It was nice to know there are other people like that, like me, that are... There's just something about it. It's quite an emotional kind of response.
Well, it is a fantastic book and a fantastic exhibition as well, Apollo Remastered. We've got just a couple of minutes left now. We're sort of running out of time. The time has flown. But we can take a few questions if anyone in our audience here wants to ask any questions to Andy. Just put your hand up and ask away.
And I was struck, I think it was there's a picture of Apollo 12, one of the astronauts sitting in front of an instrument panel. And as I looked at it, it just struck me how everything was analog in those days. So the majority of it was analog, and how far technology has moved. When you put that together with what was available, the actual achievement of men at that time with the tools they had, because we're sort of comparing it against modern day technology where so many things are possible with computerization and the speed at which things happen. How did the astronauts that you talked to, did they bring that up as a problem, or we all know it's a problem on Apollo 13, or that was the technology they had, it was the best technology they had and they worked with it? But it seems to me now, looking back 50, 55 years, how primitive it was compared to what
it certainly looks primitive, but as you say, it was the best they had at the time. So they did have absolute confidence in the equipment, particularly after, the Apollo 1 fire obviously was devastating, but the changes they made after that with a new command module really helped on Apollo 13, for example. So on Apollo 13, I spoke to Fred Hayes about his experience, and when they powered back up the command module that had been dead for days, he said it was absolutely covered in water. They literally got towels on all of those fuses and had to dry it off with towels, and then they were switching everything on 6 switches at a time and smelling if there was any burning. It was that basic, but because of the improved insulation and after the fire of Apollo 1, that really helped the design. So they all absolutely had confidence in the equipment. But yeah, it looks very primitive now. I love that because, again, we're seeing these young men doing these extraordinary things in what look like very rudimentary equipment. But personally, you see the SpaceX rockets now, they've got a touch screen. If I was ever to go to the moon and there was a problem, I would much rather have a switch than a touch screen, personally. But
yeah, you can't beat analog. Any other questions?
Would you ever be interested in accessing anything that would have been under the Soviet space program in terms of photographs that they would hold in their archives?
I would love to, but I'm not brave enough. It's very difficult to access. I would love to, but that's the next project, like say, is Mercury and Gemini. But this process, particularly the stacking technique on 16mm film, I kind of developed that for this project. So usually when you're stacking something, it's the scene, you don't want the scene to change, or if Mars is travelling across and your video across black, you can track it. But with this type of footage, you've got someone floating in 0G filming, the camera's moving, and they're panning the camera, and the person, the filming is floating. So you can't stack in a normal way because everything moves. So I developed a technique to take account of all that movement, but still be able to stack. So to be able to apply that to any kind of historical footage, maybe even beyond space, maybe something to look at in the future. It's just time. This is 10,000 hours. The next book it's been the last 2.5 years. So I'll need to pick my subject matter.
Have you seen For All Mankind on Apple Plus?
I have, yeah.
Yeah, it's a brilliant... We've just started watching it. We've flown through the series. If you haven't seen that, it's great. It's an alternative take. If the Soviets landed on the moon first, what would have happened? So just a side point. It's a really interesting thing.
Well, thank you for joining us here today at the Queen's Hall, our audience, and also, of course, you, Andy, for joining us at the launch of your exhibition here in Hexham at the Queen's Hall. It's going to be here for a little while yet, until May, I think it is, isn't it? So the end of May, so you've got plenty of time, if you're listening to this, to get down to the Queen's Hall in Hexham and have a look at these stunning images. You can find out more about the book, apolloremastered.com, if you want to look online. Of course, you can buy the book as well, and keep an eye out for your upcoming exhibitions. And you've got a night where you're doing a talk as well. People can come and see you in person and hear more of these stories.
Here in Hexham at the Forum, on the 16th of April. I think the tickets are available online or from the Forum if anyone is local. Or come down and have a weekend in Hexham, perhaps.
Weekend in Hexham. It sounds like a great title for a movie, doesn't it?
And it's on a Wednesday, so you can't do that.
Oh, right. Midweek in Hexham.
Midweek in Hexham.
Even more.
Actually, I think it's where the moon's going to be possibly full around then as well, isn't it? I think maybe just after full moon, I think.
Full moon in Hexham.
It's also the anniversary of Apollo 13. So there's so many reasons to come along.
So, there you go. That's the date. In April the 16th, you can see more from Andy on that date. And of course, if you'd like to see the moon, or indeed any other planets available at the present time, then you can come to Kielder Observatory as well. You can find out about the different sessions covering all sorts of different topics, from the aurora, just looking at the moon, the sun, the planets, the deeper universe, and you can even stay up all night stargazing, I think, as well, on some events as well. But find out all the details, kielderobservatory.org. Book an event. We hope to see you up there soon. But Andy, thanks for joining us, and thanks for you joining us as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We should also say as well, thanks to the Queen's Hall here in Hexham as well for hosting us today as well. Thank you very much.